It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jim Faust. I'll give you the biographical details first. He's a native of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He got his undergrad degree at Murray State University in Kentucky, and then he got his master's and his PhD at Michigan State University. His first academic job, because he's had others, of course, as he was going along, was University of Tennessee as an extension floriculture specialist. And you were there 5 years, and then switched to Clemson University, where he's a faculty member professor there working in floriculture. He's internationally known. He has traveled to many countries for floriculture purposes. And in fact, I had a chance to visit him when he was doing a sabbatic leave in Kenya. So he's, which has a big floriculture industry, by the way. I was trying to think back to when I first met Jim. I know you were working at University of Tennessee, because I think you were doing a talk on mums. But it's been, I've known him a long time, so long that I'm not really sure when we met. His memory might be better than mine. Do you remember when we first crossed paths?
I don't.
So we will leave that open. What Jim is going to talk to us today is the fabulous poinsettia. All of what happened between this and the plants we see over there. It's quite an amazing story. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim.
Thank you, John. It's certainly a pleasure to be here tonight. I appreciate you guys coming out and hear my story. Before I get started, I guess anybody know who the poinsettia is named after? Joel Poinsett. So I'm giving this talk in Greenville, South Carolina last weekend. And Joel Poinsett's a South Carolinian. He's from Charleston, had a home in Greenville. There's a lot of stuff in Greenville named after him. So I'm giving this talk at the Poinsett Hotel in the Poinsett Ballroom. And this guy, that's it, and a guy walks up to me and he goes, "Hi, I'm Joel Poinsett." And I'm like, no. Because I know Joel Poinsett had no children. And he said, yeah, no, a distant relative. And he brought his wife and kids, and they videotaped the talk. And I was like, wow, that's kind of intimidating, you know, Joel Poinsett. So anyway, my first poinsettia crop that I grew was in 1986. And I thought that was impressive, but then I was having dinner with John tonight, and he said his first crop was 1983. So next year will be my 30th anniversary. It's a crop that I find endlessly entertaining. I had a sabbatical leave coming up a couple years ago, and I thought, I was talking to my wife about what I should do during the leave. The previous leave I had gone to Kenya and taught there, as John had mentioned. I thought, well, maybe this time I'll just stay home and work on a book. And my wife said, well, what are you going to write a book about? And I threw out a few ideas that I thought were pretty good ideas, and she kind of just sat there and didn't really respond, and you know, I kind of wanted a little more positive response than that. And she said, well, why don't you write about something you actually know about? Well, you know, the thing I know the most about is probably poinsettia, but I'm not sure anybody would be really interested in that. And so we started talking at the kitchen table about all the people that I know in the industry and the story of the plant, which I knew kind of just a little bit at that time. And it was really intriguing, and I thought, okay, that's a good thing to write a book about. So the last year and a half, we've been kind of working at a book. It's still in a cursory, elemental stage. We've got a couple of chapters scratched out, but really spent a lot of the last year and a half just studying, doing some of the historical background behind the plant, and it's been fascinating. And of course, it's a lot more fun than doing the writing part. So I have to figure out how to make time to do the writing. So I want to share with you tonight a little bit of the story. The story is like this big, and I'm going to show you a little, pick out some of the highlights, and hope you enjoy that. So can we have the lights at this point? So the story is how this gangly Mexican shrub becomes this Christmas icon. Because it wasn't always the Christmas plant. So this is the a wild poinsettia, you see the one I have up here on the table later, you can take a look at. That is one that we actually collected in Mexico this time last year and grew for the first time this fall in Clemson, South Carolina. How that plant became this is kind of an amazing string of events actually happened to occur. We've taken a humble Mexican shrub and turned it into something that we hardly even recognize. And I need to point out that that's painted. the last talk I gave to one of the faculty members at Clemson came up to me afterwards and said, wow, who bred that blue one? I'm like, no, it's painted. We don't have blue ones yet. So, just to be clear, we'll define a couple terms that we use a lot in the talk. These are bracts, modified leaves that are showy to attract pollinators. And then the true flower on poinsettia is this thing called a cyatheum. Can we get the projector tilted down a little bit? So we don't go off the top of the screen. Thanks. So we have one of these is a cyatheum, and then the plural is cyathea. And you can see these are the male flower parts that bear pollen, and you have nectar glands for the insects to feed on. And this tastes really lovely. If you get a chance to dip your finger onto a poinsettia nectar gland, it's quite a wonderful, sweet taste. People might think you're a little crazy. They see it licking a poinsettia, but... And then what you often don't see on poinsettias that you purchase at the store is the female flower, which comes out of the cyatheum and then nods over and it swells up and gets fairly good size until it produces 3 pea-sized seeds, which then are physically expelled. They're kind of shot out from the plant and they'll travel a distance of 1 meter or so. And you don't often see those because when you take the growers sell poinsettias today when they first reach pollen, when the first male flowers start to open up, that's kind of when the plant we consider it to be marketable. And when you take it home, usually having a lower light environment and there's not enough energy for the plant to actually produce female flowers. So you don't see the female flowers too often on commercial crops. But if you had it in a high light environment, you would see it. So I kept it in a greenhouse. So the story begins in Mexico, where the plant is native to. These are locations where in the last few years, poinsettias have been sampled. I should say last couple of decades, poinsettias have been sampled, wild poinsettias, all along the west coast into this area just south of Mexico City and into Guatemala is where they're native to. So, considering that I've been in the poinsettia industry for 30 years, I realized I had never seen a wild one, and I started asking people, and in fact I talked to one of probably the main poinsettia breeder in the world, had she ever seen a wild poinsettia? And she said, no, she'd never seen one. I had never seen one. But I really need to see one of these, see what they really look like in the wild. Because when you travel in Mexico and Guatemala, which I've had a chance to do a lot, you see poinsettias associated with people's landscapes a lot, but the ones you see are always associated with some sort of human habitation. Never really seen one when I was out hiking in the mountains or volcanic areas. And so, to get to Mexico, I contacted a Mexican scientist who had collected some wild poinsettias, and I never talked to him on the phone. I talked to him via email, and he wasn't really good at responding. So you send an email, and a few months later you get a response. And so 1 year went by, and we weren't able to work out a trip. The next year, which was last year, came by. So in August he says, yeah, come on down. I'll meet you in Manzanillo, and this is the Manzanillo airport here, just off the Pacific coast. And so I hear from him in August. We're going to fly in November when the plants are naturally flowering outdoors so we can see them. But between August and November, I don't hear anything from him. He's out in the field collecting stuff. And so my wife and I, we fly down, not knowing if this guy's going to be at the airport or not. We might just have a long weekend on the beach if he doesn't show up. So we pull into the airport. And actually, this is where poinsettias grow. Just off the coast inland, about an hour or two drive up in the mountains at about 1,000 to 1,500 meters above sea level. And so we get in there not knowing if this guy's going to be there, and we get our luggage, and it's a really small airport, it's the only plane there, and walking off the tarmac. Guy's standing there holding this sign up in the air. And okay, Euphorbia is the genus poinsettia is in, and you've seen the female flower, the ovary, and that's it. And so, okay, this must be the guy. and the guy, he ends up being American, which I didn't actually know because he had a Latino name. But he had studied in the U.S. But he married a Mexican woman and had been working as a faculty member at a university in Mexico City for 12 years. Interesting fellow. First thing he says, before we even get to the car, we're walking to the car, he says, well, how risk averse are you? And I've been waiting for this trip for 2 years. You know, I'm willing to do about anything, but my wife wasn't so sure. And so I look over and she said, "Yeah, well, we're okay. We'll take some risk." And he said, "Well, why do you ask?" And he said, "Well, where I'm going to be taking you is kind of right between 2 drug cartels. and in this canyon, you know, they don't really, you know, police that one so well. So I think we can go in there, and if we're only there for like an hour or 2, I think we'll be okay." And say, "Okay, we'll take that chance." I had pictured a trip where we're going to be trekking into the Mexican outback or something, you know, for a day or 2 to find these poinsettias, but he said that you couldn't leave your vehicle unattended, you know, for a couple hours. If it sat there, they would think something was suspicious, and you just can't do that. So, yeah, okay, this will be interesting. So we find this canyon that Mark says is the largest population, native population of poinsettias that he knows of in Mexico. And this is Mark here. And the first poinsettias we see perched up on this canyon wall, which was, you know, pretty cool to see. We walk in a little bit deeper, and this is Emily here, and you can see there's plants on the steep canyon wall here, up in the hill, and then can you see up here, there's another 10 or 20 or 30 of them up there. Quite a number of them all through the hillside. Never really expected to see something like that. They grow on long arching stems, kind of off the canyon wall, on constantly moist soil during the wet season in the fall. From August through December, it rains. And then you have the dry season after they flower. So in January through March, it's called a dry tropical forest. So half the year is the dry season, and the forest just kind of dries up. And they're along these canyon streams, and some beautiful locations, some beautiful plants. But you can see they don't branch at all, in one big stem. They get up to 12 foot tall. That's just one single stem I'm standing beside there. Not exactly what you picture when you see John's trials. You know, these short, squatty, 143 varieties. Beautiful flowers when you look up close. Quite small. The bracts are small, narrow, make a nice, almost like a sunflower appearance. Beautiful plant. The foliage is about the same size as you see. And then as they mature, they continue to produce cyathea and bracts. But then the centers get very open, big round open centers, and you know, they get about, I don't know, 18, 20 inches across in that spray of bracts. Quite beautiful out there. So, again, can you see all the poinsettias up on the hillside there? This was a wonderful visit. So we trekked out, we didn't die, we have lived to tell the story. So it was a good ending. The next part of the story, we go to the Aztecs, who, when the Spanish landed, they did some really nice herbal books describing what the Aztecs used all their plants for. And the Aztecs used poinsettias, and they used it for breastfeeding. Is one of the things they encouraged nursing mothers to give more milk. And they named the plant cuetlaxochitl. Cuetla means withered or wilted. Xochitl means flower. So it's the withered flower or the wilted flower. It makes sense when you think about it. A plant that oozes white milky sap might be associated with nursing children. It also tends to dispel the common notion today that poinsettias are poisonous, which they are not. Still today, in Mexico, where poinsettias are indigenous, in one of the regions where they're most found, a town called Taxco has an annual Festival de la Cuetlaxochitl, where they line out their poinsettias, and they have like a Miss Poinsettia pageant, and have festivities in the first week of December. So that's a trip for next year, I think we got to do. The first paintings ever done of poinsettia occurred in the late 1700s, 1780s. Again, Spanish botanists were documenting the flora of Mexico. And of course, at that time, Mexico was what is current day Mexico and much of the west coast of the United States. These guys went all the way up to Vancouver documenting flowers. And so this is the first painting ever done of a poinsettia. And you can see that it's a pretty, besides being beautiful, it's quite accurate at reflecting the plants that you saw that we saw in Mexico. The name they gave it was, a little bit out of focus there, but is Euphorbia fastuosa. They actually spelled somebody came in later and corrected it. They put a V there, and somebody somewhere in history put a B over top of it. And then fastuosa means proud. If you're familiar with the euphorbs, the Euphorbiaceae family, most of them aren't all that attractive. You know, they're fairly ugly plants. They don't have big showy flowers. So this was the proud euphorb because it was you know, really a nice attractive one. Interesting enough, this picture, this name was not published until the 1880s, about 100 years later. So it's not the name that ended up becoming used by botanists for poinsettia. And the picture was lost until the 1980s, and it was kind of found again in Europe, and Carnegie Mellon University bought up all the expedition images and have these in the library in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So you can go see this in Pittsburgh if you really want to. Then there was a group of course, New World explorers, botanists that were traveling through Mexico, late 1700s, early 1800s, and those guys would collect wild plants, and they collected poinsettias. But what they collected them for was simply to dry press them and send them to European herbariums. Okay, so you could study these dead plants in a library someplace. So this is one of the original ones that was collected, and again, early 1800s, that are still in the European herbariums. We get up to the 1820s, and this is what North America looks like. You have the United States, we don't have Texas yet, and there's Mexico all here. And Mexico gains independence in 1821 from the Spanish, and the US government says, well, we really need to put a man in there to see what's going on. And so they find this guy who really had traveled the world, a young guy. He had been to Europe, had spent months with Russian Tsar Alexander. He had spent time in Napoleon's court. He had already traveled to Chile and Argentina, and really was a world traveler. Had spoke a bunch of languages, and that was the person that he found to do that was Joel Poinsett. This is a statue of Joel Poinsett in downtown Greenville, South Carolina. And Poinsett was sent down basically as a spy to report on what he saw the Mexican government doing and report his observations. And he published a book about that, came back to the US, and then a couple years later he was sent down to be the first ambassador to the US. So at that time they called him a minister. So he went down in 1825. The thing is, Poinsett's not a botanist. His career is politics. He was born in a wealthy family. He studied medicine for a year because his dad was a doctor. He didn't do that well, or he wasn't that interested, so he dropped out. He studied law for a year. He really didn't like that so much. He dropped out. He really liked to just travel. So he's a young guy traveling the world, and just like a kid today going to Europe with a backpack on his back, and that's what he did. He wasn't a botanist. He was someone that believed that agriculture was key to the development of civilization. But he wasn't like everybody else who had been collecting poinsettias up to that time. They were going out looking at poinsettia is just one of many interesting and novel plants that were there. He was interested in what plants could do to develop agriculture, to develop industries for the American society and other societies to actually develop and create jobs and businesses. He wasn't one to go traipsing out into the wild to go look for exotic plants. Okay? What he really did was he facilitated, when he's in Mexico, he facilitates the transport of plants back and forth between the United States and Mexico with these scientist friends. People tend to be from the Northeast that were geologists and entomologists and naturalists who had a contact for the first time in Mexico, and they could go and visit Poinsett, collect things. They were shell science people writing books about shells, and then they traveled back to the Northeast. And when they were coming and going, they would carry plants with them. And they brought plants to Mexico, and they took plants from Mexico and brought them back to the United States. And one of the guys that did that was an entomologist, and this is a list that he wrote of plants that he had collected in a local market to take back home when he was traveling after he had visited Poinsett. And the list is interesting. I know you can't see it, but I'll read a few of them. So the first one is, number 1, it's 105 is the list. Mexican pumpkin, seeds are sold for the market for eating. Miraculous wheat, large variegated bean, yellow bean, nectarine, ornamental tree. So some of the descriptions weren't all that good. One says a wild plant. And then the next one will say like another wild plant. Mimosa, here's the wild plant up here. And there's another wild plant, if you can see that. Very handsome tree. So this guy was an entomologist. He could care less about botanic genus and species names. He was just collecting stuff on market. There's actually plants from, seeds from France and seeds from Senegal and West Africa that were in this same shipment. Interestingly enough, number 65 is fine red flower perennial. So we don't know that this is poinsettia, but this is the closest thing that could be poinsettia. This is the right year. 1828 is when this shipment went, and that was the year we know the poinsettia was first shipped to the United States. So that could well be it. If not for an interesting twist in presidential politics, we think things are weird today, but they've always been weird in presidential politics. This is John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams, if not for a twist in presidential politics, the plant would never have been named after poinsettia. And that is, the reason is, the year is 1827, and Poinsett is in Mexico as the ambassador, and he's really not doing that well. The Mexicans are asking him to leave, and he gets word that it's going to be in the newspapers. We really want this, saying that we really want this ambassador to go back home. And the reason was Poinsett made the mistake of getting involved in the opposition political party to the existing government. He believed so firmly in the American way of doing things that he was really wanting to push that and encourage a breakaway from the European stronghold that the Spanish and the British had over Mexico. And so he really helped build up the opposing political party. Of course, the Mexican government didn't like him for that. So he catches word that they're going to be asking him to leave in the papers. So he writes a letter to John Quincy Adams in 1827, and he says, okay, things aren't going so well, I would like to resign. And John Quincy Adams says, next year there's a presidential election coming up. 1828 is the next scheduled election, and I'm going to be running again. And my next election is going to be run against Andrew Jackson. Well, who do you think is a really close friend of Andrew Jackson? Joel Poinsett. So they're political allies. And so Adams thinks, I think I'd be better off if Poinsett stays in Mexico for another couple years. And so he can't help Jackson win the next election. So he tells Poinsett, no, you just stay put, it'll be okay. So Poinsett stays there for 2 more years, comes home in 1829. It happens to be 1828 when the plant actually is shipped. So if he would have came home when he wanted to come home and when the Mexicans wanted him to come home in 1827, the plant would have never been named after him because he wouldn't have been there for it to happen. To give you some idea of Poinsett's heart, this is a quote that he wrote in a speech to the Charleston Horticulture Society in 1836. It says, "Let me exhort you to introduce into our country new fruits and vegetables and useful or ornamental plants. Let every member whom business or the pursuit of health or pleasure leads to travel in foreign lands bring back with him seeds and plants not hitherto cultivated here. If one of these succeeds, he will be rewarded by the consciousness of having conferred a lasting benefit upon his country." So that's what he was really interested in doing. Interestingly enough, the Mexicans didn't appreciate him. And today, there's still a term used called poinsettismo. And poinsettismo means to meddle in somebody else's affairs. Okay. So he did some good things, but the Mexicans certainly have not appreciated. They really today don't appreciate that the Americans took the plant, made a whole lot of money off of it, and they don't feel they've got much from it at all. So much so that they dislike Poinsett even today. Poinsett only wrote 1 book in his life. It was the year that he was a spy. He wrote basically a travel log of his year abroad, and it's called Notes on Mexico. Okay, And you know how when you do movies and books and you publish them in a different language, they'll change the title a little bit. It's the same book, but the title's changed. Well, you can get the same book. This is Joel Poinsett draped in an American flag. And the title is Te Odio Mexico. Any Spanish speakers? I Hate You, Mexico, by Joel Poinsett. So his book, Notes on Mexico, has become I Hate You, Mexico. Yeah. Funny thing. So, the first plants shipped to the U.S. arrived at Bartram Botanic Garden. They really weren't a botanic garden, they were a nursery, but that's what nurseries were called in the day. The Bartrams, you probably are aware of. John and William Bartram were basically the American father of natural history and of botany. They were deceased at this time. Third generation Bartrams were running the Bartram business out of Philadelphia. You can still visit the gardens today. It's quite a lovely place. The plants the Bartrams would ship plants in boxes like this. Their business was collecting New World plants and selling them to wealthy Europeans. That was their business model. And so their last catalog that they ever published before they went out of business was in 1838. And so it's 10 years after the poinsettias arrived at their business. And this is the first time poinsettias are sold in a catalog. And interesting enough, this catalog is extensive. It's amazing. They have like 200 geranium varieties in the catalog. It's not what you would expect. A huge list of plants. In the section called greenhouse plants, they list Euphorbia. We'll make it a little bit bigger here. Euphorbia poinsettiae is what they called it. The splendid scarlet euphorbia, and they charged $2 for it. 1838. Pretty good price. Considering this past weekend I was at home and the Black Friday Lowe's poinsettias were selling for 99 cents. So it has not been a good 2 centuries for the American poinsettia industry. Growers struggle to make a profit on these things. Robert Buist had a nursery, and he was the one that really commercialized and sort of pushing the poinsettia as a commercial product. This is his nursery drawn in the 1840s. And he writes a letter to Poinsett that is really intriguing. It kind of gives you a flavor of the day. And this letter is not atypical. There were several nurserymen writing letters to Poinsett basically saying, we really appreciate you sending us plants because it's really driving the business. Today, what drives horticulture is who has the newest, bestest, different, whatever. That's what drives horticulture, is getting the new color of something, the first person to have this new species. Well, Buist writes this letter saying, can you please send us more cacti and orchids, because the poinsettia really sold so well, we would like to have more plants. And so he writes this whole letter basically asking for more plants, and in it he has written Euphorbia poinsettia, and he puts an asterisk, and the asterisk is this little column he writes in here, just to squeeze in, and in this column he lets Poinsett know that he's the person that named the plant poinsettia. So what he says here, this is what the column down the margin says. It says, the plant introduced by you was sold under the name Euphorbia heterophylla, but I discovered that it was a new plant and honored it with the name of its distinguished introducer, which it is known under in Europe and America, and hope it will retain that name through all the vicissitudes of nomenclature. So please send me some more plants. A couple things interesting about that. Euphorbia heterophylla, which is what a plant was first thought to be, some of you might be familiar with. It's a ditchweed in the Carolinas. It's all along the Gulf Coast, Florida. It looks a lot like a poinsettia, very small. This is just a couple inches across. The plant gets about 3 foot tall, and each of the bracts is kind of dipped in red. But otherwise, it looks a lot like a poinsettia. Cute plant, but kind of weedy. As for the vicissitudes of nomenclature, those of you kind of understand what that's all about. Poinsett really didn't fare that well in terms of nomenclature. The Germans end up being the first people to publish in a botanical magazine or botanical publication a botanical name for the plant. A lot of people were calling it poinsettia or Euphorbia poinsettiae, but that name wasn't published until a couple years after this. This is 1834, and the Germans called it Euphorbia pulcherrima, and so that is the name that has stuck. You still see in the 1800s, throughout the 1800s, people calling it Euphorbia poinsettiae, but that name really has been erased from the history books, or modern botanists certainly will not use it. And so the name poinsettia is relegated simply to the common name in basically English-speaking countries. If it's not an English-speaking country, people tend not to know the name poinsettia at all. So what is curious to me, too, is shortly after the plant arrives in the US and Europe, botanical artists are starting to paint it. This is the first painting of a poinsettia, or drawing, etching. 1836, just 8 years after the poinsettia arrives in the US. And if you look at that, tell me, does that look like that? Not at all, does it? Not at all. What was the artist thinking? To me, it looks a lot more like that. That is the oldest known poinsettia variety that we still have today. It's a variety called oak leaf. It's from the 1920s, collected in New Jersey. And so we have this growing in our greenhouse at Clemson this year. And again, if you go much wider bract compared to the length in that versus that, looks, now we don't have quite this, maybe he was using his imagination how good it could be. This looks like a modern commercial variety practically, doesn't it? What does that tell you? Poinsett wasn't a botanist traipsing out into the wilds like Emily and I were with this crazy Mexican scientist between drug cartels, trying to pull out plants from the wild. He's collecting plants that are in commerce in the marketplace. He's picking plants, or these guys that are transporting the plants for him are picking plants that are in the marketplace that have already been selected by the Aztecs and the Mexicans for perhaps centuries. Already been selected for bigger bracts, showier plants. They don't look like this. So the first drawings usually don't look like wild poinsettias. They look much more like a cultivated poinsettia. Another example of that is just a few years later, 1844, James Polk wins the election. His wife, in the inaugural ball, wears a nice dress. And if you look on the side of the dress, it's embroidered with poinsettias. And they really don't look like wild poinsettias either. They look more like oak leaf. She did this because she was paying homage to Joel Poinsettia's support of her husband in that election. So, but again, not a wild poinsettia look there at all. So the Aztecs and Mexicans certainly deserve some credit for the selection of poinsettias, I think. We jump ahead to 1870s, and there's another European botanist going across Mexico, and he finds a double poinsettia. Anybody ever seen a double poinsettia? They don't have any cyathea. They just have a proliferation of bracts in the center. He collects it, brings it to New York City, and sells it to a florist in New York City for $1,000. And the florist is bragging in the gardening literature, I paid $1,000 for this. Yeah, this is pretty impressive. Robert Buist, the same guy who wrote Poinsettia later in the 30s and 40s, he writes in the gardening trade, he writes this quote. He's describing the double poinsettia, and he says, "Since the introduction of poinsettia from Mexico 40 years ago, it has been without rival as a distinct scarlet-bracted winter decorative plant. It is now, however, likely to be effectually superseded by a new and totally distinct form recently discovered in Mexico, namely the double poinsettia." He's predicting the downfall of the single poinsettia, because that's what horticulturists do, right? We get roses that have 5 petals in the wild and we put 100 petals on. We get chrysanthemums that have 1 array of petals and say that's not good enough, we need hundreds of petals. We do that with dahlias and everything. That's just what horticulturists do, right? And that's what happens with poinsettia. And he said, well, same thing's going to happen. This is going to be the one we'll never see single rim of flower petals again. But he was pretty wrong, wasn't he? Because no one in here has ever seen one. I only saw one for the first time a couple years ago. And the first poinsettia actually ever patented, the U.S. patent system started in the 1930s for plants. This is the first poinsettia patent. It was the 176th plant ever patented, and it was a double poinsettia. The name of that plant was called Henriette Ecke, and this is a picture of it grown just last Christmas. but they didn't ever become popular. I suspect when we grow them, it's the worst performing post-harvest plant. The bracts fall off very, very quickly. It's not a very good plant. It is kind of, I'm not sure it's actually very attractive either, but that's another case. So turn of the century, poinsettias still aren't all that popular. I mean, they're out there. Wealthy people that have a greenhouse to overwinter them, they'll call them hot houses. They'll keep some plants in there. Not a real big popular plant. In fact, in the advertising, this is the first advertisement that actually has a picture of poinsettia, picture of a poinsettia that I could find. This is 1917, and this is the poinsettia here. And you can see for Christmas sales, they're calling it the true Christmas flower, and it's mixed in with Christmas peppers, dracaenas, ferns, crotons, and begonias. At this time, the advertisement for Christmas decoration, primed to the two big plants that you saw would be mistletoe, a lot of advertisements for mistletoe, a lot of advertisements for holly, cut holly stems and berries. So the poinsettia world really takes a turn in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, when a gentleman named Paul Ecke takes this plant in Southern California and starts to produce it commercially as a cut flower crop. And he really becomes Mr. Poinsettia in the first half of the century. He, at the peak of production in the 1950s, he had up to 800 acres of field-grown poinsettia production. Started out on, actually had a business on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. That's where they started out, then moved further south toward the San Diego area. Here's a picture of the Pacific Ocean in the background with fields of outdoor grown poinsettias. They actually got two crops out of these plants. What they would do, the workers would harvest stems, long cut flowers, and John has worked on cut flowers in the recent decades. We try to bring back poinsettias as cut flowers. It just hasn't really caught on that well. But they would harvest these cut flowers, and then, obviously in December, and then in January, February, they let the plants go dormant, and they'd cut them just a foot off the ground, and they would dig them, and they called these dormant canes. And they'd take these dormant canes, and they would take them to the warehouse and grade them, and they had about 5 or 6 different varieties at this time. They're all named after different Ecke family members. And then they would box them and truck them to the railroad line, and then the trains would take them to the East Coast and deliver them to greenhouses that would then pot them up in March and April, grow the plant through the summer, take some cuttings off of them, and then grow a flowering crop in the fall for Christmas. This would be inside of a greenhouse, early 1900s. Tall cut flowers over here, shorter potted plants on the right. Potted plants in clay pots here. They had two big problems in the 30s, 40s, 50s. One of the biggest problems was leaf retention. When you would put the plants into a home environment, you sell them to somebody, they'd put them in a lower light environment, the leaves would all just fall off. And to compensate for that, what the growers would do at the time, they would leave a hole in the center of the pot and they would stick a fern in there. Okay? And that was just a common thing to do at the time, because they knew all these leaves are going to fall off. You can also see how gangly these things kind of were. They didn't pinch them back then. They would just grow straight ups and put 3 or 4 or 5 in a pot. What they would compensate for, these plants were cut flower varieties because they were coming from shrubs that were grown in Mexico. None of them were compact. They would get really big, and growers didn't have any real good tool to keep them short. So what they would do is they'd bend the stems. Take the stem up, and if you macerate the stem with your thumbs and forefinger, it bends down, and then you macerate it again, and you bend it back up, and you tie it. And we had growers in South Carolina that have told me even up until the 1970s, they would do this if they got a crop that was too tall at the end and it was ugly. They would bend the stems to make it look a little bit better. The plants perform remarkably well when you do this. It really doesn't hurt them. If you just bend them fast, they snap. So you have to macerate them. So try that with when you buy for Christmas this year. So there are two problems. Plants get too tall and they drop leaves. The biggest variety in the 1950s was a variety called Barbara Ecke Supreme. It was a tetraploid. It had double the chromosome number. The bracts would be 22 inches across, or the whole flower had really big plant. The cyathea are like the end of your small finger, orange cyathea. But big, vigorous plant, and it didn't hold its leaves well. So the USDA scientists, they recognized that this is a pretty attractive plant, but it doesn't hold up well in hotel lobbies or for the consumer. And so they started a breeding program in the 50s to actually improve leaf retention. And then they taught growers in the early 60s how to start breeding programs themselves. And there was a business in Ohio called the Mickelsons that came up with a variety that they called Paul Mickelson in 1963. This plant, it was they'd grown some seedlings, thrown them out into the dump because they didn't think any of them were any good. And they come out a couple weeks later and one of them still looked really good even though it had been thrown away. And they pick it up and say, this has got to be something good. So they start breeding, they introduce Paul Mickelson, and it takes over the poinsettia market. And the Ecke family or business that had been really dominant up until this time is on the verge of bankruptcy because nobody wants to grow Barberry Ecke Supreme and all these old, big, tall cut flower types. This is a more compact and a much better performer. The other thing that the Mickelsons figured out was nobody really wants dormant canes either. They're much better off if the growers much prefer getting rooted cuttings. So they would take a cutting, propagate it, and ship rooted cuttings much cheaper than shipping a dormant cane. And so, again, nobody wants the product that Ecke's growing, and Mickelson really takes over the market for a part of the decade, the 1960s. Things changed. Paul Ecke Jr. gets involved in the business. He has young children. He needs to hire a nanny to help take care of his children. And he goes to hire a young German woman, immigrant woman, that just had come over. And they interview her and say, oh, she's really good. We'd like to hire her. And she said, well, I'll only take the job if you hire my husband. And he said, okay, we'll make him the gardener. And so he's the gardener. Well, Paul Sr. is realizing, boy, we need to start a breeding program because Mickelsons have the best variety out there. Nobody wants to buy our old varieties. We need to breed our own poinsettias. He said, well, what do we do? And he said, that gardener's a pretty bright guy. And so he went out, took the gardener to the greenhouse and said, this is how you breed poinsettias. You take a paintbrush, collect pollen from one plant, you go over, dust it on the female flower of another plant, you mark who the parents were, you put a name on it, you collect the seed, we grow the seeds, and select for improved varieties. That gardener was Franz Fruewirth. He and his wife were trained as tailors before they had come to the U.S. So he was a tailor, and then he was a gardener, and now he's a poinsettia breeder. He ends up becoming the world's most famous poinsettia breeder. And today, there are more poinsettia varieties introduced by Franz than any other person in the world. His first popular variety was just 3 years into his breeding program. He comes up with C1, not a very creative name. C, because they labeled the first year were A's, the second year were B's, the third year were C's. So this was the first cross of the third year, C1, 1968. And it is actually the first variety that really looks like a modern commercial variety. Really prolific bracts, large bracts, very tight centers. It's a beautiful plant. Even today, we grow them, not commercially, we grow them for fun. It's as pretty as any poinsettia out there. Very nice plant. A brighter red, lighter colored red than most of our varieties today, but still gorgeous nonetheless. The other variety that Franz is well known for is Winter Rose, which came out in the late 90s, right before he retired, that has a curly bract. So, the next poinsettia story. There's a Norwegian grower named Annette Hegg. He walks into his greenhouse one day and he sees this plant. And he says, that's not like any poinsettia I've ever seen before. The reason is, up until that time, poinsettias were upright and poor branching. They were vigorous and poor branching. So this is the typical architecture. And we got to do all sorts of things to try to keep them shorter. He sees this plant in his greenhouse. So we call this one on the left, that's a traditional branching pattern for a poinsettia. The one on the right, we call that a free branching is the term used to describe that. And he recognizes that, you know, this is really a valuable product. He names it after his granddaughter. Her name's Annette Hegg. And so today, you talk to any poinsettia grower that's been around for more than a few years, they know Annette Hegg. Because Annette Hegg is really the poinsettia that really put poinsettias on the map. It really allowed the plant to become the commercial success it is today. And that is because it exhibited free branching. Paul Mickelson on the left versus Annette Hegg on the right. Annette Hegg branches freely, it's more compact. What advantages of that in the marketplace? I only need to put one plant in that pot, and I pinch it, and I can get 5, 6, 7 flowers. For these old varieties, I would typically put 3 or 4 plants in a pot. So if I can do 1 versus 3 or 4, that's just a no-brainer. You know, these plants, nobody wants that plant anymore once they've grown this. This is a plant that's much more conducive to the potted plant industry, for the florist industry. Really allows the poinsettia world to be turned on its head, and everybody wants Annette Hegg. Of course, you know how breeders work with plants? You know, if somebody comes up with something good, then everybody will take pollen from that plant and transfer it to their plants and try to get the genes that are creating that one unique trait that new plant has and get it into their breeding line so that they have varieties that have that same wonderful characteristic, right? So we call that, you know, copycat breeding or Me Too breeding. Everybody wants free branching because that's where the market is, right? The thing that's unique about Annette Hegg, you can grow seedlings ad infinitum, tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, and none of them will ever branch. None. So what happens is, really the Ecke family, who has a business partnership with the Hegg family, they basically dominate the poinsettia world for a whole decade because they're the only people in the world that have free branching poinsettias, and nobody wants the old poor branching, non-branching varieties. Nobody can figure out how to get branching into the next generation of plants, and so of course, since Ecke and Hegg had patent on Annette Hegg, nobody else is allowed to propagate it legally. All right. Then Paul Ecke Sr. He liked to travel to Europe every summer with his wife Magdalena, and just to visit growers, to visit customers. And he was known to carry a suitcase full of money because this was in the 70s. You didn't have credit cards, and he knew if he saw something that a grower had in Europe, he wanted to be able to buy it on the spot. And so he'd have money to deal with it. So he happens to walk in to visit this backyard breeder. The guy is not a commercial grower. He has a greenhouse that's about the size of maybe, you know, a fourth of this room. Small little greenhouse in his backyard. His name's Gregor Gutbier. And Paul Sr. walks in there and he sees Gutbier has free branching plants all through his greenhouse. And they're not Annette Hegg. And he says, how do you do this? And he goes, I'm not going to tell you. And Paul brings out a suitcase. And he says, I'll give you $5,000 if you tell me. Cash on the spot. And a cut of the royalties from any plant we produce with this technology that you have, if you tell me the answer, what it is. So Gregor Gutbier tells him how he does it. And so it's a trade secret that the Ecke family has for the next 10 years that nobody else in the world has. So they had Annette Hegg for 10 years with no competition. Now they can take that branching characteristic that Annette Hegg had, and they can put it in any variety they want. So what they did, they took varieties like C1, Franz Fruewirth's first variety that was really popular. Beautiful plant, but it doesn't branch that well. They introduced free branching in the C1, and they call it Gutbier V14 Glory. And so the whole next decade of plants are all Gutbier varieties that have branching in them. So there's a 20-year period. Nobody in the world has what these guys have. They do very well, I would say. what Gutbier's technology, well, let me, yeah, I can't skip over. What Gutbier did that was magic was he took one plant, and the green represents a free branching plant, so like Annette Hegg. He would introduce a non-branching plant like C1, and he would graft them together. And then something would happen in the non-branching plant where that branching characteristic would be transmitted into that plant. Then he would come in here and cut that one off, remove the rootstock. You come in and cut that one off, and you create a plant that looks like that. And now this non-branching plant has branching. And you can take cuttings off of that for the next 100 years, and everyone's going to branch. So you only have to graft it once. But they don't know why. They just know it works. And so they have the secret for, again, this is basically 20 years where there's no competition in the marketplace. This is what they look like when they're grafted. So you wrap some stuff around them here, and you sever here, sever here. You take free branching Annette Hegg, non-branching something else, and whatever it is that's free branching stuff moves into here and causes branching. All right. Still, nobody knows what's doing this. So there's a professor at the University of Minnesota. His name is Harold Wilkins, and he decides he's going to figure it out. And he has some ideas. And so he searches the country for the best graduate student that he can possibly find to do the work on this project. And he finds this young guy. Dr. Dole. So John gets to work on this project. And y'all didn't know this. John's world famous for figuring this out. What is it that, well, actually, at this time, they didn't know that grafting was the way to get this branching agent in the plant. So they figure out branching, that grafting is the key. And then their hypothesis is that what is the factor? They know it is not genetic, right? Because if it's genetic, seeds are going to eventually have free branching. They know it's something biological. And what they conclude is that it's a mycoplasma-like organism. And mycoplasma, they've changed the term now, they call it phytoplasma. But basically it's a very simple bacterium that lacks a cell wall. So let me show you here first. So these are phytoplasmas that it wasn't actually until the 1990s that it was proved conclusively that this is the cause of branching. USDA scientists did that. But these phytoplasmas are pathogens in all other plants that we know of. It's a fairly common organism, but they're pathogenic in most plants, so they cause negative features in all other plants. They cause diseases in peaches, they cause like witches' brooms in some plants. But in Poinsettia, it's the only known case where this basically pathogen causes a commercially beneficial response. These can't be cultured outside of plants. You can't grow them in a petri dish. They're not strong enough because they lack a cell wall. You can't take it out of a plant. They only live inside of plants. So there's only two ways really to get it from one plant to another. And one is to connect the vascular system of one plant to another by grafting so that the phloem is connected, the sap from one plant goes into the sap of another plant, and the phytoplasmas go along with it. Or there are some insects called leafhoppers that suck enough juice out of plants that they can go from one plant to another, and that's how in nature it tends to happen, where these diseases are spread by these leafhoppers from one plant to another. So when this secret is revealed, basically the monopoly on Poinsettia breeding has fallen apart. So basically there's a 20-year run where there's really a lack of competition in the marketplace. And Harold Wilkins, he's a little bit of a storyteller, but maybe an exaggerator, but he tells this story. He said, you know, John Dole went to Europe to talk to the growers about how you could graft plants to get free branching from one plant to another. And John's given this talk, and at the end of the talk, after he's finished looking at his notes, he looks up, and the audience is empty. And he said, what happened? And somebody leaned over and said, they've already gone to start their own breeding programs. So phytoplasm. The $64,000 question is, how in the world does a phytoplasma show up in a Norwegian greenhouse, of all places, right? It's cold up there. I think you need leafhoppers, because leafhoppers don't appear in greenhouses. You need an infected plant that has a phytoplasma in it, and you have to have a poinsettia all in the same room. And that, I don't know, the odds of that happening in Norway I don't think are all that great. My theory is that we know that the Hegg family in Norway were getting plants from Ecke in California at the time. At that time, Ecke's growing hundreds of acres of field-grown poinsettias. And if you have poinsettias in the field, there are going to be leafhoppers out there. All you really need then is the third thing, which is an infected plant for the leafhopper to transmit it. Nobody noticed it in California. The plants were dug up, shipped to Norway, they start branching, and Mr. Hegg was observant enough to know he had something special when he saw it. But that's just my hypothesis. This is another little story or two before we finish up. The poinsettia industry really blossomed from the 70s to the year 2000. You know, 40 million isn't all that big of an industry in 1976. And you can see it basically a linear increase, 500% increase over a 25-year period of time. Pretty incredible, really. There's several factors that are the reason for that. Certainly, Ecke Jr. gets perhaps the bulk of the credit for this, because he was a marketing guy. He really wasn't a grower. He knew that it was important for the Ecke business to promote poinsettias, and Christmas was the season, and he thought it was really, he would take every opportunity to get poinsettias put into important places. He was really the first person that really used the idea of product placement. He knew if you put a poinsettia in the right place, you could sell it. And so, being in Southern California, he had contacts in LA and would get involved in the industry, the movie industry and the TV industry. And not a very good picture, but this is Dinah Shore. Remember, there's the Mac Davis special, all those Christmas specials. They always have poinsettias on the set. And the Eckes would just donate them, just to get them on the TV screen. He would donate them to the local TV stations, and he'd encourage growers across the country, just donate them to your TV station so that they're on there every Christmas season. So when people see Christmas, they think poinsettia. And he was very successful. And so what really happened then, poinsettia was no longer just a Christmas flower. During that big run from the 70s, the 80s, 90s, it became the Christmas flower. So much so that it has become really the harbinger of the poinsettia season. Walmart did a study a few years ago where they had poinsettias in some stores and not in other stores, because they don't really like to grow poinsettias or sell poinsettias, because live plants really just aren't all that convenient for Walmart to deal with, you know. And you put them by the door, and, you know, especially further north, the cold winds comes in, and it's just all bad news. You got to water them, and it's not good. And so they don't really want to grow them. So they had these stores, they didn't put them in, and they did a comparison. They found when they put poinsettias in the store, especially near the entrance where people see them right away, it's a signal that it is okay to go do Christmas shopping now. That their stores that had the poinsettias sold more other products, and it's associated with the poinsettia being there, giving you the permission to, even though it's before Thanksgiving, go ahead and buy some buy some. Now, the Black Friday poinsettia, you know, the growers don't appreciate this much, because, you know, nobody likes their product to be sold for 99 cents. You want to have value in your product and to be treated with value. And if it's 99 cents, it's not valued. But again, Home Depot told the growers, because the grower gets paid. In this case, the grower would get paid $2.98 for this plant, and then Home Depot or Lowe's sells it for 98 cents. Kmart did a blue light special here last week, 89-cent poinsettias. Okay. But they were in 4-inch pots, small ones. These are 6-inch pots. So this was actually 99 cents was a better deal. Home Depot told the grower said, we don't want you selling them for 99 cents because it devalues our product, right? And they said, if it helps us to sell $100 million of Christmas supplies that we have in there, and if it helps us to bring people into a hardware store for Christmas shopping, because, I mean, really, you don't go to Lowe's for Christmas shopping. There's a few things you can get. You can only buy so many drills. But if it gets people in the stores buying other Christmas products, we'll write a check to the greenhouse industry for $5 million every year if it helps us sell this other $200 million of inventory. And so it has become what we, in marketing, it's called a loss leader, right? You lose money on each sale, but you hopefully sell something else. So anyway, so that is the story of how a humble Mexican shrub has become our Christmas icon. And with that, we can have the lights. And can entertain a few questions if we have time. Assume we're good with time? All right.
Is there not much effort being put toward these other varieties lasting as long as the red variety? The others seem to lose their bracts much faster. Is there no effort for that? It's all color, not for lasting?
Well, you know, I think the way plants work is that, you know, it's really easy to grow red poinsettias. I mean, because they naturally are red. So when breeders breed red ones, they have like thousands to choose from. And so you can choose, you know, for the best performing, because there's 20 that all look alike. We can choose for some other characteristic. With the colors, you know, often they're just happy to have a really good looking pink, and so they'll, you know, kind of wash over the effect that, okay, it's not as good of a performer as all the red ones, but it's the best pink we've got, because most of the pinks are kind of ugly. They're kind of grayish. So if we got a really good pink, you know, we'll go with it even though the leaves fall off a little faster. So I think, and that's just true in the plant world in general. Geraniums are the same. You get a white geranium, they're never as good a performer as the red geraniums. You know, chrysanthemums, the yellow chrysanthemums are best performed. Pansies, yellow and purple are the best performed. You get an orange pansy, and they're horrible growers, but you know, people will buy it because it's orange. You know, so the novelty colors are usually underperformers in general. I think that's just the nature of the beast.
I was in Haiti in the late 80s, and I saw what looked like poinsettia trees that were like 25 or 30 feet tall.
Oh, no.
Okay. I was misinformed on what they were.
Right. Yeah, in the tropics, there's some really big, beautiful trees that from a distance look like a poinsettia, but they're not. Poinsettias, I mean, they'll get 15 feet, and you'll see, but they're shrubby. And those always have a bit of a gangly, ugly habit. If it's a nice-looking small tree, it's not a poinsettia.
The slide you showed with the wild next to each other, I actually like the wild one the best.
Yeah, you know, here's the wild one here.
Real pretty.
This was in the wild, you know, just 13 months ago. Beautiful plant.
Yeah.
It's a pretty lousy performer in terms of it doesn't have any of the good characteristics of our commercial varieties in terms of the leaves fall off. It has a terrible habit. It doesn't branch. It's kind of pretty though. So we're entertaining the thought of starting a breeding program to get something that looks like this on a plant that actually performs well. But that's just a dream at this point.
What is the common name for that in Mexico?
Buena noche. Common name in poinsettia for Mexico is Buena noche, meaning holy night, Christmas Eve. Buena noche.
The wild one would be better if you keep it off the TV. No, I'm just kidding. Are you getting close to a yellow or an orange?
Well, there's an orange one on the market called Orange Spice. It's a fairly deep orange. It's not a, you know, I wouldn't say a bright orange, but it's pretty, and I like it. It's orange. Yellow, we had yellow ones a few years ago. You know, people kind of made fun of them. You know, it's kind of like, you know, yellow snow. You know, do you really want yellow snow? But that's come, you know, so they kind of came and went. People didn't like the yellow ones. But now there's, John has in his trial one called Autumn Leaves that I think it's gorgeous. It almost glows, but it's kind of a yellow with peach. And actually the idea is that it's more Thanksgiving colors, so you can market it, you know, a little bit different market. No, that was moaning. It's beautiful. And John tells me this year there's one that's even a bit yellower.
Gold Rush.
Gold Rush.
It'll be at the trials. It really is a very nice golden yellow.
And then, like at Clemson, at graduation, what they do, they just get white ones and they paint them orange. That's true. And it doesn't look bad, actually. Any other? Yes, sir.
You mentioned I'm sorry, I'm more interested in the history. You mentioned in the history that the ones that the early pictures seem to be from don't look like the wild one. They look a little bit closer anyway to the cultivated one, and you sort of threw off, well, the Aztecs were selecting those for a couple hundred years. How did they do that? Did they have a breeding program?
No.
How is this? Were they finding them?
Oh, there you go.
Oh, there.
That's gorgeous.
Isn't that wonderful?
No, that's autumn leaves.
That's autumn leaves,
That's
but
autumn leaves.
that's a wonderful plant. Well, I don't know what they did. But Montezuma was known to have a botanical garden, and so gardening was fairly important, and flowers were important in the society. I suspect it's just a matter of like dogs or anything. We select something we like, and humans tend to be attracted to bigger flowers, showier flowers, and so there's 100 of them out there. You pick the biggest one, and then it sports. Poinsettias sport fairly spontaneously. You get one spontaneous mutation, and it's a little bit bigger and better, and some people take it, and you do that over several hundred years, and you've got something that no longer looks like a wild one, and we do that with flowers all the time, I think, and animals.
I'll mention that it's thought that they did the same thing with marigolds, because if you go back, the marigold was developed down there as well. And
Was it gaudy?
they make bigger flowers. It's selected for bigger flowers.
Yes, ma'am.
I used to have what you showed on the screen. I didn't know the name. I knew it was some relative of a poinsettia, the little wild, it looked like a poinsettia. I found it here in the Carolinas and dug it up and brought it home. I wasn't able to keep it going. Is there any place that you know where those still can be found, or does anybody have?
Like the one I showed, they're weeds.
I know, I like.
But they're annuals, so the plant dies, but they reseed quite a bit. And so, yeah, if you find somebody, I would just try again.
Is it like in woodlands? That
She
you
has
make
some.
Mile away, Fairgrounds Garden, we pull 1,000 up every single year. Go come help us weed.
Awesome. Thank you. No kidding.
Yes.
One more.
Back.
I tried.
Before you mentioned, when and where in Mexico is the festival done every year?
The festival is in Taxco, which is in the state of Hierro, just southwest of Cuernavaca. Yeah.
When?
The first week of December.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, we're done. Thank you very much for your attention.